Hey everybody, welcome to the Purpose People podcast. We've got Sammy Burt from BackPack and Farleigh Performance, so welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So before we go into the depth of the companies, just tell us about your first job. Let's go there.
My first job. Well, I was always itching to get out and work. So I think I started washing up in our local pub when I was probably about 12 or 13.
12 or 13?
Yeah, I think, they'd employed anyone back then. So I was in there and I just loved doing something and getting paid for it. And having the fun. I think I really enjoyed the environment in the kitchen, everyone bouncing around and the busyness of it.
Yeah, my first one was... I think I worked in a greengrocer's that I absolutely hated.
Oh, why? What did you hate about it?
Just having to work on a Saturday.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, but yeah, it was a very odd place, very odd people. But I remember leaving. But before then, I made money out of washing cars. Took a bucket, bit of washing up liquid in there, and a couple of sponges, and knock on a door. I go, do you want your car washed? And charge them between 5 and 10 quid. But you know how old I am. That was a lot of money.
That was a lot of money. Yeah, that was a big investment.
Yeah.
Actually, okay, if we're going to go that far, then I was definitely getting 20p out of the tip jar when my mum worked in a little tea rooms, and I was probably very young, and she'd let me occasionally clear a table or two
cool.
for 20p here and there. So I think we were all working fairly early in different ways.
Yeah. So from that, then obviously your career progressed. But what was it? What was it you decided to study for? Did you decide that I was going to go to university and study, or did you just want to get and work? What was your journey in terms of that school?
I'm not from a family where university was like an expectation.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that in a bad way, but I think my parents, no one in my family had gone to university.
Yeah.
So there weren't really any expectations of any of us two. And having worked very young in the pub, and then I was always getting Saturday jobs or doing this or doing that, always wheeling and dealing to some extent.
Yeah.
And I went to college after school, but I just wanted to get out and work, and okay. I think there was a real drive in me to be a grown up quicker, and just to get out there and do it. And I had a summer job in a nursery, children's nursery, and I was earning, good money for a 16 and 17-year-old. And so the idea of going to university and kind of staying a kid for another 4 years versus starting my life is how I saw it at the time. It was a no-brainer. So I dropped out of college.
Okay.
I did my first year. What
was the college in? What did you study?
I was doing fine art, English,
okay.
French, and business studies. And I came out after a year with a half an A-level in fine art, a smoker's cough, and just a desire to get on and work and kind of be in this world. I was just itching to be part of the world I was watching.
So when you talk about wanting to be part of the world and wanting to work, did you have an idea of what you wanted to work in, or was it just any job whatsoever?
No, I think... my parents had always had lots of different jobs.
So were they quite entrepreneurial, or just kept changing jobs?
My mum is.
Okay.
My dad was in the fire brigade for a long time.
Okay.
And then...
But they normally have a side hustle, don't they? The
fire
brigade?
They're normally doing something. I don't think they're allowed anymore, but they were back then. And then he came out with an injury when I was probably about 5. So he became stay-at-home dad for I've got 3 siblings. And so my mum had like 5 jobs most of the time. She was driving school buses in the morning, dinner lady at lunch, school bus in the afternoon, working in the pub of an evening. She even drove the tour bus around Hastings for a few years on a Saturday. And at the time would always be starting jobs or little businesses. So she... Mum and Dad bought a Rolls Royce at one point, and she was doing wedding cars. And then... She'd have an idea and put a little poster up in the post office in the village, 50p for 5 weeks rental of this advert.
Cool.
And it would be something like, go on holiday and I'll come around and turn your lights on and off every day, or move your car in the driveway, kind of fool the burglars.
Nice.
And so she'd always have these little things happening. And I think, so from that, I just assumed that something good would happen. I didn't ever feel like I needed to be like directed at something. I sort of just thought, it will come, it will happen.
Yeah, yeah.
So when I dropped out of college, I went to work in the nursery thinking, I quite like kids. And did that for a little while and then realised, actually, I quite liked the challenge of it. But once it wasn't challenging anymore, I was done with it.
Yeah.
So I went and worked on a holiday site for a year, and then I went into hotels, and that's what brought me actually from Hastings, where I grew up. I moved down to Bath when I was 19 to run a guest house in the centre of Bath.
So you've almost gone back to the hospitality.
Yeah,
industry
went
again,
back to that. That mum and dad had a tea rooms when we were younger. So I moved to Bath 19, thinking I was 29 probably, or 39, and took on this live-in role in a guest house in Bath. It was lovely for a bit, but it's really not a role for a 19-year-old. So I started getting fidgety there. And I went back to college in the evenings in Bath to study finance. And then I left the guest house and the boyfriend and went into a marketing agency to run their finance and started getting interested in marketing.
Yeah.
And so I sort of then dropped off the finance bit and stayed in marketing, and then moved from there to an agency that was much more in brand development.
Yeah.
And so it was a deeper sort of understanding of brand and organisational stories.
Yeah.
And I think that's where I really started to feel at home. And we started to lean in that work into purposeful organisations. So I'd never had any kind of conversation about purpose or values or culture. I had no idea what these words meant, or the impact of them.
Yeah.
I was just realising that I really enjoyed being around people. And I think I've been quite lucky. There's so many times in my life where someone's quoted something to me or said a model to me, and I'm like, I've got no idea what that is. And then they'll say, oh, but you just did it, or I think I've been quite lucky to be near a lot of stuff and learn through osmosis. I don't always know the thing that it's called. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, even like seeing your mum as well, like doing all these different things.
Yeah.
And then you realise that she's very entrepreneurial.
Yeah.
But we got a term for that now. Back then it's like jack of all trades, you might say.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think she and my dad in different ways, dad through the fire brigade particularly, and then my mum through all these different things that she would try, they were just indestructible as far as I was concerned. Like you just couldn't. So I just grew up with this belief, and I didn't even know it was a belief because it's just how you think, right?
Yeah.
That I was indestructible too. Like I would
That's positive.
I would just come into contact with something, and it wouldn't dawn on me that it could be a really big bad thing ever. I'd be like, even if it's that bad, I'll be fine.
Yeah.
Because everyone's always fine in this, and that doesn't mean bad things didn't happen, but that I think it's given me permission to try a lot of stuff.
And I think that's what's great. It's like that sort of growing up and that lifestyle has allowed you to just, for where most people will be fearful and then just not do it, it's like you've seen it modelled and said, well, what's the worst that can happen?
Yeah.
And you just change and you find something else.
Yeah.
So it set you in good stead.
Yeah. And I think everyone has an ego, right? And it's healthy to have a little bit of that. But I think in some ways it's reduced the amount of ego that I have tied into a risk or something that I try.
Yeah.
I don't need things to succeed immediately. I'm not that fussed. As long as it's the trying bit that I really enjoy.
That was a bit my journey where I probably pushed so hard with the ego thing and got to and run it to its natural conclusion, was wake up, life's not all about you type thing, and then become more purposeful and more mindful and all that sort of stuff. Because I've maybe saw that as with my family. My dad was in the Navy, mum was a housewife, and me even going to college was breaking the norm. Why do you need that? Just go and get a job. And I felt I was always pushing against something growing up, like just to try and prove it. And, it's weird because I didn't really realise the job that my dad had until I was much older, but he was doing the 8th most dangerous job in the world.
Oh my goodness.
Which is literally bringing planes down onto aircraft carriers. So imagine when a ship is going like this.
Yeah, it's full on Top Gun.
He's got to pin them down, but sometimes linked arms with people to link.
Oh my goodness.
It's just nuts, So, but he come out the Navy when I was about 2, and he must have been 24, 25, and he's always loved that So he'd done loads of different jobs, partly because of health and stuff like that. And I just felt that I just want to pick one thing and go after it really hard, fast and furious. And then I got to that end goal, and then I realised it's not maybe the best legacy, because of the type of clients I was working with, and then come away from that and become more purposeful. So I just find it interesting, like with yourself, and even with myself to some extent, we were people where education wasn't at the core.
Yeah.
Like, higher education and stuff like that. It was almost like breaking the norm.
Yeah.
But even for me, I felt the pressure like, well, if I get a degree, I'll probably be the first person to get a degree. And in fact, I didn't. I went for an interview in the summer before. I'd been to a couple of university interviews, and they said, you don't need it, you'll get a job. But there was this thing of, well, maybe I need to get it just to prove everyone wrong. And then I had an interview, and they said, no. I think 2 universities, I think it was Bournemouth and it was Cardiff.
Oh, yeah.
And both of them said, you don't need to do it. Don't get into debt. Just go get a job. And then that's what I did. I literally had first interview, got a job, and didn't look back. But for me, the purpose question began to rear its ugly head when it all became about ego. That's kind of where I'm going. It was all about ego, and I thought that's not a great model either. Building a life all around yourself, and then it was like, how do I make my life more impactful? And that's kind of where I got to the journey that you know about, in terms of ended up on mission trips and doing all that sort of stuff. And then I come to the conclusion it wasn't my skills that were wrong; it was how I was applying them. But for me, education is quite interesting, because there's a lot more people than we realise that didn't do formal education.
Yeah, and it's a funny question that you get. I mean, I get it a lot, like, oh, what did you study, or where did you go? And I do notice, like, some discomfort in me sometimes, where I want to be like, I didn't go, and I'm proud and all that sort of stuff. And of course, then I'm making it a competition, which it's not. We've just gone completely different routes to get to where we are.
But interesting. So we've done, I don't know, probably filmed close on 100 podcasts. But everybody that's living purpose, what they studied for, they've not ended up doing.
Completely right. I think that's probably true across the board for most people anyway.
But isn't that, we put such a big thing on our university and study and all this sort of thing.
Yeah.
But chances are we don't end up doing what we studied for. A high percentage, anyway, certainly with a Purpose People podcast, I start to see trends, and that is one of them. Yeah.
I think I'm one of those, I'd like to have a degree or a master's or something. I don't actually want to do it.
Yeah,
like I'm,
an honorary doctorate,
an honorary one would be wonderful. If anyone's listening, that can make that happen. But I think I've started so many courses throughout my life, and I get a little way into them, and I'm like, I just need to be doing it.
Yeah,
I really struggle with the kind of sitting down and theorising, and I don't think I missed out on the whole uni, because I had a lot of friends that went to uni. So I'd do the weekend visits and get all the fun bits of uni in the mix, and then go home and back to work.
So you went into a company, you're obviously in marketing now, and you're doing more purposeful. You're starting to see businesses differently and more purposeful. Was it at that point you thought, no, this is what I really enjoy? Because I mean, up to that point you were testing and trialing, and all of a sudden you're kind of like starting to narrow down and going, oh, this is quite good. Yeah,
I think what I realised was that one of the other things my parents had kind of instilled in me with this, what's the worst that can happen sort of attitude, is that you also shouldn't put up with things that shouldn't be happening.
Yeah. Okay.
So weirdly, when I started talking about purposeful organisations with my then bosses, who are wonderful, it didn't feel like anything new. I was like, well, yeah, surely that's how it should work. It didn't. I think I was quite lucky in that I hadn't been exposed to big businesses that thought differently.
Yeah.
I obviously exist in a capitalist society, but I didn't feel like I'd been had by that particularly. Yeah. So when people talk about, actually having a place that you enjoy working in, I was like, well, yeah. Like it didn't feel like that was a shift. And it still surprises me now when I have conversations with people and they're like, well, I don't know about that. Or they have some disbelief that it's authentic, that you can have an organisation that truly cares about its people. And I'm like, well, that's how it should be. Yeah. So I think the other thing that really supported me in that is that I always just wanted to have fun. Everywhere I worked, I wanted to have fun. And the guys I worked with, we had a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And so again, it kind of cemented that we can be profitable, do really good work and have fun together and with our clients.
Yeah. So the clients can actually enjoy it as well.
Yeah, it was brilliant. And why shouldn't we, you know? And if we're particularly in the
good.
creative industry, we need to be having fun.
Yeah.
And the importance of joy for me became louder and louder and louder. And I started moving more towards the people aspect of the work that we were doing, the cultural aspects, in order to... I felt like I was just sort of trying to help people have more joy in their lives. And that sounds really cheesy, and yet I wholeheartedly stand by it.
No, I
believe
like
in
it. I like it. I like the fact that to have joy and joy in work and joy in the workplace, that's a great value to have, because I think I wasn't exposed to that monotony of turning up and doing the grind and I'm just doing it until I started freelancing in corporates.
Yeah.
So when I started freelancing in corporates, I started to get exposed to, you've been 10 years and you hate it.
Yeah.
And I was like, but you hate it. And they go, yeah, well, I've got a mortgage, got a car, got this, got the education. And I remember one guy saying, oh, you know, what I'd love to do is do what you're doing. I said, oh, all right.
Go on then.
Go for it. He said, but, you know, I want to get my 4-bedroom house and my 2 cars and dog or whatever. And in me, as he's telling that story, I'm just dying inside.
Yeah, I have a bit of like an allergic reaction to that. I'm like, oh, yeah, no, that would all be nice, but surely not at the cost of all your happiness and like the good years, you know, like it doesn't compute for me either.
Exactly. So then you're living life for the weekends, and then Monday to Friday, you're just getting through it.
Yeah.
And then Sunday night, you get this Monday dread come upon you. So really, it's probably about a day and a half that you're actually relaxing.
Yeah.
You know, and I knew I didn't want to do that. And at times freelancing, it's like, oh, we could give you this. We could come join us. And I was like, no, not talking to your staff. I'm not going to join you.
Yeah, that's it. The work that I do now is so much in that space. Often it's referred to as like organizational development or leadership development. I like to think of it as kind of system coaching.
Yeah.
You know, really you're in a system, whether that's a team, an individual, or the whole organization, and you're just supporting them to achieve whatever it is they want to achieve or unlock, ideally. But joy is still such a big, like, that's how I suppose I've defined my purpose is to help people access more joy.
Well, you know what the podcast is going to be called.
Yeah.
It's going to have the word joy in it somewhere.
There you go.
But for me, it's interesting that one of your companies is called BackPack.
Yes.
And what I like about that is it always, as soon as you see that, I feel like you're taking people on a journey, and you always wonder what the destination is. But for me, it's not that. It's actually to enjoy the journey along the route.
Yeah.
Have joy in the process.
Absolutely.
It's not like called pinnacle performance. You know, it's like there's the end goal. We're all going to get it. It's more, no, let's learn and enjoy the whole thing.
Absolutely. And where we thought we were going to get to might not be the right place to get to. You know, you might get halfway through the journey and be like, whoa, why did we think we wanted to go up that hill? We definitely want to go up that hill.
Yeah.
And BackPack came from Exec Foundation, actually.
Yeah.
We did an exercise where we were talking about, there's a peer group coaching session, and we were talking about my past and my future and kind of thinking about what I wanted to do next. And the guys got me stood up, moving backwards in time and telling my story, and then moving forwards in time and doing it again. And as I was telling things, I was saying, and then I did this, and then I did this. And someone said to me, what are you doing with your hand? And I said, well, I learnt that, and then I put it in my backpack and I moved forward. And I realised that, and that then led to, years later, the name of the company, because I realised actually I hold a really strong belief that most people have everything they need already in their backpack. They just need help kind of digging around in there, finding it, or knowing how to utilise it, or emptying it all out on the table and just seeing what's in there in itself. And so it felt like a really easy name for me. It was one of those moments where you just go, oh yeah, like no dithering. Like I'd spent weeks thinking, what am I going to call my company? And then BackPack, I was like, yeah, that's it. And it's kind of developed a little bit in its meaning as well for me. And in so many organizations have everything they need inside them, and yet they keep looking outside for more to bring in. And actually we're not supporting the people in them to be at their best and to utilize them. And I don't mean that in a squeezing your assets way. I mean, when you're at your best, we're going to get more from you.
Yeah.
So how do we? So it is both capitalist and people centric at the same time. This is profit and purpose in balance.
Yeah, but it's willing to ask those deeper questions.
Yeah.
To say, are you enjoying what you're doing?
Yeah.
Well, no, I'm not. Then why not you do it differently, or give someone permission to do it differently?
Yeah.
Or change your role. It's so having that confidence to have those kind of questions, and I mean that's kind of where I got to, is that actually, although from an ego perspective I'd achieved everything I wanted to achieve, but was I enjoying it? I was enjoying the life around it, but not necessarily the job.
Yeah.
Which most people get to that conclusion, and certainly when I was going to the corporates and seeing this continual theme of how long you've been there. Oh, I've been here 8 years. Okay. And what are you going to do? Well, probably here another 10 years. It was like a badge of honor.
Yeah.
And it was like, okay, but you don't enjoy it. And I think if someone just pulled that person aside and then just spent some time about where their best skill sets are, what they actually enjoy, they might find out either in the wrong role, or they might be in the right company, but just in the wrong place.
Yeah.
And to go and do everything they can be. So I think you're right. In business, a lot of people look outside for as an outside solution, but you don't spend enough time with the people to see that they wake up in the morning and they're like, yes, I'm going to make an impact today.
Yeah. And there's a lot of, we're seeing at the moment is a lot of parent-child organisations, and particularly since COVID, I think leadership that perhaps was more dispersed took it back during COVID.
Yeah.
Almost like wartime leadership. Everyone went, okay, cool, we're going to make some fast decisions, and they're struggling to let go of that again. They're struggling to share that sense of leadership out, and so you end up with parents, and then the phrase is child, but I think it's more adolescents. You end up with parents and then teenagers who flip-flop between doing as they're told and rebelling, and it's not anybody's fault, right? It's one of those things that kind of emerges out of a behaviour over there, and then a policy over there, and then a mindset over here, and someone came in from a different organisation over there and they had it and they're really influential, so now we've brought it, and it just kind of emerges and people don't notice. And so that point about so why are you still here? Sometimes it's almost like coercive, like, well, I didn't realise I could leave. I didn't realise I had choice.
Yeah.
I had a boss, the first boss I had after coming out of running the guest house. I went into this marketing agency, and he said to me once, "You were frying eggs when I met you." And I remember just standing there and thinking, how dare you? Like, how dare you take the pride or the success of who I am now? And this is only 6 months on.
Wow.
But there was something in it that said, no one else would have you. You're lucky to be here.
Wow.
And that will always stick with me as being just a moment of like, no, I'm all right, actually, thanks. I'll pass on this one. And I quickly moved on.
Yeah.
And I see that a lot, but not in such a toxic way. I see organisations that are doing that by accident.
Yeah.
They're sort of saying to their people, oh no, stay, this could be great and we can do some great stuff together. And they're not really realising they've got choice.
Yeah, I think for me, the way I've always seen life is that if you can build a company where people can facilitate or live out their purpose, then great. If they can no longer fulfill their purpose or whatever they do in your organisation, then it makes sense that they move on. And I've kind of, that's how I saw life. But in terms of COVID, I get you. Because I was talking to someone the other day and they basically said, so where's people's challenges in their business? Now, this person's an older person, almost ticked the boxes of stereotypical answer. But they basically said, we can't keep hold of our staff. Oh, okay. So I then happened to mention, have you thought about, 4-day work week or da-da-da-da. Anyway, long story short, they demanded that they all come into the job.
Yeah.
All come in because it won't work. And it was like he just described, just out of his mouth, the problem that they got in their organisation because it's top down and you must do what we tell you. So why would people want to stay?
Well, and do I feel particularly trusted by someone who basically says, well, if you're at home, you're going to be putting the washing on, you're not going to be working.
Yeah.
As opposed to someone who says work where you work best.
Yeah.
And it is, And at the same time, I can hold the other side of it, that it is a big challenge. You know, we are losing the kind of office osmosis through which more junior people might learn by just overhearing things or being around it.
Yeah,
so there is a balance to be had. But if we want people to come back into the office, we need to tap into what motivates them to come back into the office. And policy and system and procedure isn't going to motivate them. No. You know, if you're talking to someone who doesn't particularly want to come into the office, but feels strongly about growing younger talent, well, great, then let's help them understand that by coming in on a day when there's more junior people in there, they are going to be supporting them in their development. That's
you know, and that that's one of the things that I found that people miss the connectivity of being around people.
Yeah.
So, you know, when we ever talk about it, because we're all remote now, that's the thing. I miss the office because I don't see people face to face, you know. Now, that's not always enough for them to want to come into the office, but in some of the team, they're like, yeah, we'd love to. So we're in the process of now going, we got rid of our office because it wasn't fit for purpose. We'd all moved away. But now we realise that we need a studio to do what we're doing here and so on and so forth. So the office will change and then it's open. If you want to come, you can. If you don't, you won't. So we're in that process, but it's kind of like you go full cycle. We realised we had to get rid of the office. That took me 6 months because it was ego. Because I thought, well, if I don't have an office, then I'm not a proper business.
Yeah.
You know, but I went on that journey.
Yeah. No, I get it.
And then when I finally let it go, it was like, okay, that's gone now. You know, it's not a problem. And then if we were to have an office, what did it need to be? And it's obvious now it needs to be a studio, but we didn't know that.
Yeah.
So there's a reason for it, and we got a team like Rob and Nathan and that sort of stuff. And it's a case of it has its purpose, but it has to be purposeful. It can't be just desks and screens. It's got to be more than that. But I'm comfortable in that. You know, I'm comfortable in the fact that they would come in to connect with their mates in the team, and that's fine. But they don't have to come in 9 to 5 every single day of the week. I'm open. And I mean, that's probably where it got me, is that when the offices opened up, I didn't want to be the one to say, oh, you all must come in Monday to Friday to justify the paying for the office. Yeah. Which is where people are at. The reason they're doing it is a finance issue. That if I'm paying all this money, I can't just have 2 people in the office or 4 people in the office. Yeah,
I think there's a number of drivers. I think trust is a big one.
Yeah.
As well as the finance, you know, the justification.
Oh yeah, no, I agree on trust. I would say number 1's trust, number 2's money.
And I think it's the unknown as well. Like, well, how is this going to work? And people aren't seeing the pace of attitudinal change in our workers, you know, and this idea that, you know, I can't keep people, they're leaving after 2 years. Well, yeah, that's the next generation will be leaving after 2 years because everything has sped up. You know, most people don't stay in a job more than 3 years, and we're seeing that expedited even more. So actually, how do we become an organisation where people grow when they're with us, so that they do their best work, and if they leave with, you know, great opinion. They might be great leavers, and they might come back in 10 years' time or whatever it might be. But I think so many organisations almost feel a little indignant, you know, or cheated on when someone leaves.
Yeah, after 2 years.
Yeah, like, rather than being like, okay, the chances are this person that I've just hired is going to leave in 2 years' time. So how can I get the absolute best out of them in those 2 years? Completely shifts your mindset about how you might work with that individual.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because, like, for me, when someone does move on, you're like, oh, you know.
Yeah, and it can be emotional as well.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and I think there's that. But do you think with more purposeful organisations, with your experience of working with, do you think that they have a little bit more longevity of the people that stay there, or is it the same across all kinds of organisations? Would you say? Do you think purpose keeps people for a little bit longer, or impact rather than? I think
it does, and the really purposeful organisations won't try to. So they might almost have the mindset of you're going to move on in 2 years, and then it turns out it's 3.5 or it's 4.
Okay.
So I think they have a greater level of comfort. I think the only challenge to that is when we talk about I was going to talk about charities actually, but that's not fair, because I would say some corporate purposeful organisations can be the same, where you're so cause-led that it feels like anyone that leaves no longer believes in the cause.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So that can be quite hard to deal with as well, to be like, you know, so we're doing this amazing thing, and if you're going to leave, then does that mean you don't believe in it anymore, or you don't want to do it anymore, or whatever it is? So I think there's a balance to be. I think there's balance in everything to be had, but particularly with purpose, that the word can become really heavy.
Yeah.
I think that's the worry I always have about the word purpose. Is it's both incredibly important and needs to be held really lightly.
Yeah.
So that we're not weighed down by the cause. So we don't. I see it in charities that we work with, where the service user, for want of a better phrase, is having such a tough time that the people that work in the charity will work to their detriment, not look after themselves, not exercise self-care, because they will never have it as hard as the service user does. And so you end up with a burnt out organisation or a really tired organisation because they're comparing themselves to the people they're working with.
Yeah.
They're not recognising, actually, if I'm really going to be useful to the people I'm working with, I need to be at my best. That means I shouldn't take work home with me, or, I need clearer boundaries, or I need sleep, or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
So this is where I think that's where it needs to be held lightly sometimes, is to recognise that to truly serve your purpose, sometimes you need to recognise where the edges of it are.
No, it's great. I mean, and that's the thing is so I remember talking to a police officer. Well, he was a police inspector at some point, and he come to the conclusion he wanted to do something else. Now, listen, his thing was always about justice. So if you go back, it's not the job role. His thing is about justice, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is where sometimes we attain purpose to the job role, so they're the same thing.
Yes, as opposed to the individual.
As opposed to what's his purpose. So his purpose is about justice. And when you understand that, then you understand the decisions that you make. So after 20 odd years, he says, I'm quitting. Everyone around him says, but why are you going to do that? Think of your pension.
Yeah.
And he said, I'm not going to be around in another 25 years if I keep doing this job.
Yeah.
So I'd rather go now and go and do what I want. So effectively what he done now is he left and started a company, which is a whistleblowing app.
Nice. Yeah, really
So he's still doing purpose, but he's doing it
in a different way.
And I mean, that's the thing that needs to be educated, that you can have a purpose and it can take on many different roles, and that police inspector role, so it will help fuel what happens when the whistle is blown and the whole journey there. So it's like Lego bricks. It absolutely makes sense. But I think you're right, where people think purpose and they just think of the organisation, and then it's like it's that or nothing.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's being aware that there is a journey that you're on, and it can manifest itself differently. Yeah. Across different organisations. So it's like the purpose is attached to the person as opposed to the organisation. But for that season, that organisation is aligned. And then eventually, right, I need to go to do the next thing to fulfil my purpose and be content in that. I mean, that for me is how I see it, you know. And so when someone would go, you know, we've been together 3 or 4 years, and they go, look, I need to go and do this now. It's like, go for it. We had a video editor with us for ages and ages and ages. And I remember him coming to me like, oh, no, I'm going to have to leave. And I remember just thinking, it's the right time. Go for it. You've learned what you needed to go here. I didn't even fight the kid. I just said, it's absolutely right for you. Go for it. And he's going to work with his old mate from university. I said, do it.
Amazing.
You won't regret it. And, you know, and that was, I even surprised myself, because so what am I saying? But it was good. It was good for him. It was a good move for him, because it made absolute sense of where his life was and what he needed to do. So yeah, it's not always easy, but I think sometimes you've got to almost hold your breath, take a couple of steps back, and then look at the bigger and go, actually, that makes that sense. Because you're a steward of people, right? You're not like this.
Yeah, absolutely.
So talk about, obviously, BackPack. We've talked about that as a great name. Talk about Farleigh Performance then. So, well, you know, obviously the word performance is there for a reason. Yeah. So just explain us a little bit around that.
When I was starting BackPack, a guy that I had partnered with some work on years before that I knew around Bath saw some stuff I'd put out on LinkedIn and sent me a message and said, I think we're sort of starting similar things at a similar time. Should we have a coffee? And I went along with my then 1-year-old in a pushchair and met him in a cafe on a rainy day. And he was much further along in his experience of organisational development. And I mean, we're talking about someone that he'd been an HR director of EasyJet. He'd just finished a role as the first chief purpose officer at Tate & Lyle, and I'm sitting there going, hey, yeah, I'm tiptoeing into this. And we had a really great conversation about what we were trying to do. And I was coming from a brand into culture angle, if you like, and he was coming from an HR into culture and purpose. So we were kind of meeting in this melting pot.
Sort of
yeah, and he was chatting to someone else at the time as well, a woman called Juliet, who had been in-house most of her career as an organisational psychologist and in HR and working in D&I and things like that. And so we carried on these kind of separate conversations for a little bit, and then we met in a cafe on a Wednesday, and the three of us, it was the first time the three of us came together, and it was a really quiet cafe, and we were like, where is everyone? And 2 days later the world shut down with COVID. So it's actually our anniversary of that meeting on Thursday.
Oh wow.
So the three of us sort of sat down and said, do we want to do this thing? And Graham had already been setting it up for a while and had set up the business in partnership with Bath Rugby. So we had this kind of influence of professional sport. You know, what can we learn from professional sport and bring into organisational culture and people development and growth? And then Juliet had all of her experience in-house coming into it, and I was coming from this very different angle as well. So we had this kind of nice little mashup of approaches, and spent the next year 3 miles apart, getting to know each other online. And the great thing about COVID for both businesses, for Farleigh and for BackPack, was that geography was went out the window. So we were working internationally immediately because everyone was online. So it didn't matter if you were down the road or not. And that really helped, I think, start us all off with confidence. And we're now a few years in. We're a group of 6 now.
Oh wow.
We're doing some really cool, like super challenging work, which I just love. I'm just so fueled by the challenges that we work on, and getting into the deeper side of people.
So I mean, obviously you don't want to give names away and stuff like that, but just give us an example of the type of challenges you would come across.
So at the moment, definitely seeing a lot of organisations that have a number of people in leadership roles who aren't leaders. Yeah. And that's no fault of the individual, but people are often, there's the Peter principle, which I don't particularly like, but the Peter principle is that people are promoted to their highest level of incompetence, which I think is desperately unfair, because it puts the onus on the individual as being incompetent, as opposed to the organisation for not having supported them to succeed in the role they were promoted to. But we see a lot of that, and I'd rather call them accidental managers. There's someone that were really good at the thing they did. They were so good that they were promoted out of the thing that they did into managing other people that do that thing. Oh, yeah, it's big. And given no support on, so how do you lead people? How do you have greater self-regulation so that the way that you are isn't negatively impacting the people that you're leading? You know, all this sort of more complex stuff. And then organisations get to a point where they realise they've actually got, often almost a line through the middle of the company where there's challenges, or even actually at exec level, again, people have been promoted up and up and up. So we do a lot of work with organisations in that space. And I think what's really important to us in the way that we work is that we keep those things connected. So there's a theory often referred to as me, us and it. Yeah. And those things need to stay connected. If we keep taking individuals out and working on them over there, and then we drop them, helicopter them back in and say, now be different. It's completely unreasonable. And
which is interesting, because that's a bit like brand, isn't it? That's what happens in brand.
It can be sometimes, yeah.
You just take people out.
Put it on the top.
And then you come up with this brand and go, there you go, now be your authentic self. It's like, but I'm having to dress in a way that's not the way I dress, and I'm having to speak in a certain way because your tone of voice says this. So I like it.
And of course, none of us can develop individually. We can't. There's this sort of beautiful irony, absurdity, that I can go off and sit in a white room and come out better. I can develop myself, while I can only develop in connection with you, and I can only develop in connection with the context I'm in, and so we work really hard to work with people in their context, not in ours. And when in the real work, and help them to understand that the more they are connected to other people, the more authentic they are, the more open they are, the higher trust levels they have, the greater chance of everyone being at their best. So we really try and hold that me, us, and it. Me, we the community, and it being the business or the context that we're in, the challenge that we're facing. And I just love it.
No, it's great because I look at it from the perspective of, you know, I was an art director and I was good at that, and that's what I did, and I learned and I studied and I got good at it over a period of years. But now I'm an entrepreneur, you know, a bit more entrepreneurial now, and I've come to that conclusion, but I've had to educate to get to that point, because I could have just said, no, I'm just this. And I think sometimes people in organizations that get promoted, they're not being educated, they're not learning, they're not reading, or they're not invested in themselves. And so therefore then it's like, well, yeah, they're an amazing graphic designer, but they don't know how to run a team of 12 because they have no leadership skills. But because they've been here 15 years, there you go.
Well, we think people are born with leadership skills. And this kind of brings me on to my obsession with words and how they can just be such traps for us. You know, this idea of leadership, like it's a thing, like you can just download leadership and be that tomorrow is so crazy. And it doesn't mean anything on its own. It doesn't mean anything outside of the context of a conversation with someone else. So that you and I understand what you mean by leadership and what I mean by leadership. But it, like the word professional, is banded around all the time as if we all have this really clear shared understanding of what it means. And professional is one that makes me laugh because I've seen it on people's values. You know, one of our values is to be professional. Well, I think that just means getting paid. Like at the bones of it just means getting paid. And you know, historically you'd have professions and vocations, but nowadays it doesn't have a shared meaning. So when we demand it of people, Daryl, be professional. Well, what I have no idea what that means because I don't understand your perception of what that means.
And different projects and different clients and different interactions, once you've got the full context, then you understand what professional is to that organisation as opposed to somewhere else.
Exactly.
And you know, I was talking to Rob the other day. We were joking about the similar thing. It's like you hear that word banded around and go, well, but what does that look like in your? So what in you? Okay, to explain. Okay, so this is how we see it. You know, and we don't ask those questions enough. We just band it around. Oh, well, that was unprofessional. Why is that unprofessional? What? Well, your expectations not clearly communicated. Do you know? Because if I knew what that was the expectation that you had, then it wouldn't be unprofessional because we'd know when to deliver the information that you needed at a certain time. So there are certain words or triggers, I would call them triggered words. It's just like, that's one for me.
Well, and so I like to make up new words, which apparently I've been doing all my life. I remember my dad, one of his favourites of mine when I was a kid was swallowable. Because if you had soluble tablets that dissolve, then surely the ones that you swallow are called swallowable tablets. And I remember my dad, like I just thought that was what they were called. But I've gone on and invented words that don't exist without knowing for a long time.
Any stuck? You've become famous for?
Swallowable is definitely up there.
Okay.
I've got some faux pas where I've thought something was a word and it turns out it definitely wasn't.
Right.
But one of the ones that I think came up in the last couple of years was leaderful. So this idea of leadership being this, similar to fellowship or relationship, it's a thing. It's and therefore to be in a position of leadership, it's a suit of armor I could put on, for instance. You know, it's something I can wear. Whereas to be leaderful actually is more similar to be delightful or to be beautiful. Actually, it's very difficult to describe why someone is delightful, but you feel it. You're near someone.
Yeah, that's good.
It's very difficult to describe what's beautiful about someone, but it's in the eye of the beholder. You know, and I feel like that about leadership, and therefore why I've moved to being leaderful. Actually, if I want to be a great leader, there are going to be so many different unnameable ingredients into the person that I am that you are going to experience me to be leaderful, but you won't quite be able to put your finger on why.
Do you know what? That's a book title. I've ever seen
the
one
next
before.
one, yeah.
But that's great, you know, because it's a case of when you say that, immediately I think servant leadership without you having to say it.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
You're there to serve. You know, and leadership always seems I'm at the front of the ship and we're going to go this way and everyone's going to follow me. Whereas that leaderful thing is like, it just seems a lot more wholesome. We're taking everybody together, but I care about the people.
Yeah, there's more complexity to it as well that says actually if I'm leaderful, there's going to be times when I'm off my game. and that's okay too, because I'm human. I think it brings a human dynamic into it. So that's one that's stuck, and I've introduced to a few people, and people, it seems to resonate, which is nice. The other one that isn't a new word, but that I sometimes just try and shift them. I think sometimes if you say something that's a bit uncomfortable, people listen a bit harder.
Yeah.
So rather than talking about development, I often talk about developing. Because it's an ongoing process. Development is like, I could do it, I've done it, and it's in that box, tick.
Yeah.
Actually, let's work on how we introduce a practice of developing. Well, then that's forevermore. That's continuous improvement. That's the way that we are now. And so I really enjoy the derivation of words. So when I looked into developing, as opposed to learning, I can't remember where they come from, like Latin or whatever.
Yeah.
But learning is essentially about taking on knowledge, taking on new things. Whereas developing comes from unrolling, which I love. It comes so then I imagine like these ferns, like
unpacking.
the way that this is it. The backpack, it's already all in there, and actually we're just unrolling or unfurling when we develop to reveal more of ourselves, and at the same time, I think of a fern in my head, the way it unrolls. It then has a greater capacity for water and for sunlight. And so actually, if we develop in a way that is just about spreading ourselves more and getting more of ourselves out there, we're then actually going to be lucky enough to receive more at the same time. So I find words really useful for helping us to move on from a word that's thrown around a lot back to almost its original meaning.
I like that.
And then building forward again.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, I was talking to a whole load of entrepreneurs the other day, and one of the key things is that fear of failure. And that's come out of, for me, it's like often about perfection. They wanted to be perfect before they even start.
Yeah.
So I got the most perfect website, perfect logo, perfect this, whatever. And, I heard a statement, it's probably been used to death now, but progress, not perfection. But actually, that's what it is. As long as you're making progress, who determines what perfection looks like?
Yeah.
As long as you're 2 years on and you've made some kind of progression from where you were, that's fine.
Yeah.
Whereas people go, right, I've got to get the website in place, got to get this in place. But actually, even the term website, they evolve. They're not like one and done now.
No.
And I think that's what I like about these people just going, no, you don't have to be perfect, just get going.
Yeah, that's it. We do, in a lot of the conversations lately I've had have been around focusing on the input rather than the outcome. So many people focus on the outcome, which for most people is actually outside of our control.
Yeah.
I can't do much for a client to say yes to a proposal. I can do loads to make sure the proposal is as good as it can be, to make sure I've heard them. So focusing on all of the inputs, but I can't focus on the outcome because it's outside of my control.
Like that. I was talking about the marketing the other day, and I said, look, I can get that ball from the tee right to the hole.
Yeah.
But if you can't putt, that's not my problem.
Yeah, this is it. You can't. Well, one of the other KPIs that always makes me laugh when we get in is when marketing are measured on sales. It's like, well, they can't do that bit. That's not fair.
Yeah.
It's a really typical one. Or the analogy that I like from rugby actually is that you could, in practice, kick the ball to try and get it through the posts 10 times, exactly the same, down to the micro movements, and it go through.
Yeah.
And then on the day, you do exactly the same thing. The wind blows, and it doesn't go through the posts.
Yeah.
Now, you didn't miss when you kicked that ball, but you didn't score.
Yeah. Okay.
Or it wasn't scored. So focusing on all of those inputs rather than focusing on the fact that it scored or not.
Yeah.
All my people that know rugby are going to mock the terms that I've used in all of this description, but you know what I'm saying. Just focusing on the things that you actually can control.
Well, it's just so like for instance, going to elite sports, it's like the elite sport from the aspect of, let's say, a player is going to take a penalty. They've been doing this 200 times in training. Their skill is to, in their head, forget the stadium.
Yeah.
And boil it down to the mechanic of striking the ball into that place in front of a person.
Yeah.
And the better they are at that, the more chance they're going to score. Because if they think about all the people that are going to let down, for example, if they miss this, chances are they are.
Yeah.
So I remember I was in a cup final managing a football team, and I probably had my worst game because I was thinking about everybody else. I was a manager. I was doing different. I didn't get a chance to warm up. I come running out. Whistle went, right, we're going. And it was like, okay. And people say it didn't play that badly. I just knew I didn't have my best game. But it's because I was worried about so many other things, letting everybody down. And I realised that actually, when you see people choke in a final, you understand it. Because I've been there as well, that you don't play your normal game. But if you actually boil it down to, I'm going to run down the wing, I'm going to have a bit of fun, and if I cross it in and we score, we win. Yeah, those people's absolutely flourish because they've just brought it down to the fact is it's a game.
Yeah.
that's what it is. It's a game, you know. And if you lose the game, you lose the game, and then it might hurt for a day.
You just don't win.
That's it. 100%.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Sammy, you've got, BackPack, you've got Farleigh Performance. I know you're writing a book.
Yeah.
So is it coming out? When's it coming out?
Oh, so
how you got on?
I gave myself a pass last week because I'd overcommitted. And despite so much of the work that I do, supporting people to be a bit kinder to themselves, I'd stitched myself up really. It took my 84-year-old aunt to message me and pull out of a commitment that she'd made for me to go, oh yeah, I need to backstep on that a little bit.
Yeah, okay.
So in terms of when it's launched, hopefully the autumn.
Okay, cool.
But I'd committed to the summer and I was like, I need to just give myself a bit more space. So, yes. So
what's it on?
Working title is What's a Grown Up Anyway?
Okay.
So it's back to this issue I have with these words that are thrown around. And I realised a few years ago that this idea of being a grown up is very similar to professional, right?
Yeah.
It's weaponised often, like grow up.
Of
when are you
course.
going to grow up? Blah, blah, blah. It's also sort of set as an expectation that people should meet, be more grown up or whatever it might be. But how can you have an expectation you don't understand? Like, we don't know what grown up actually is. I don't know what one is. Yeah. And the more people I would talk to, and I'd say, do you feel like a grown up yet? And so, without fail, people would sort of grimace and almost like look around like they were going to tell me a secret and be like, no, I don't feel like one yet either. And they could be all ages. And I started to realise that it felt like there was almost a version of imposter syndrome of we're all pretending to be grown-ups, but no one really knows what one is. So we're doing our best version of what we think one might be. So I sort of set out on this journey, this exploration to try and define what it is to be a grown-up. And if I'm honest, when I set out on it, I thought that the answer I would get to was that there's no such thing. And that it would be kind of this mythical creature. And actually, I learned through a lot of the research I was doing. So I did lots of interviews, I did surveys, I looked at other people's research. And I also did some really obvious stuff. So just in case I was missing something that was really obvious, I started by just looking in the dictionary. Is there a really obvious answer for this? And there isn't. It's really unhelpful. Like the dictionary's like, when you reach a point of maturity. Well, okay, what does that mean? Or to speak with a grown-up voice was, I think, one of the other examples. It's like, well, that's entirely unhelpful. And then I looked at things like legal ages to do things, actually is the answer there, but that's all very different as well. I can drive a car at 17. I could be prosecuted for something at 10 or 12, but I'm not responsible enough to put my own seatbelt on until I'm 14. So there's all these like weird little nuances going into like, okay, so that's not the answer either. I looked at biology and that there wasn't an answer there because that happens at all different times as well. And which really got me to a point where I was like, okay, there's something different between an adult and a grown-up. An adult felt like it was something you could define, and there might be lots and lots of different definitions. So I'm an adult enough to drive a car in the UK at 17. I'm adult enough to have alcohol in the States at 21. But they were definable. But to be a grown-up seemed to be emerging as this unnameable set of qualities that we experience when we're near one. And so I then set out through, again, more research and conversations with people and a lot of self-reflection and therapy to try and understand myself a little bit more, to get to, so what are some of those key ingredients? When we're near someone that we consider to be a grown-up, what is it they're doing?
Yeah.
And it's certainly not taking charge, telling us what to do, being the loudest, all those sort of stereotypical,
I think it's what we do, isn't it?
Yeah.
To pretend that we are.
That's it. Yeah. I'm going to be a grown up by running the situation. And actually, the more conversations I had, the more that people would identify the grown up in the room as being the person who held back and was more considered and then brought something to the conversation.
Yeah.
So there was these qualities that seemed to be a juxtaposition to the knee-jerk everyday definition of what it is to be a grown-up.
Yeah.
And it's beautifully the solution. That's not the right word, but the kind of the qualities that have come out the back of this are qualities that kids have automatically. And that's what I've just loved about this loop the loop, that actually children are born with high levels of curiosity and compassion.
Yeah.
That's what we name often when we talk about someone that's a grown up.
That's good, yeah.
But we've trained it out of ourselves.
Yeah.
Whether it's through the systems that we're in or the perceptions or the imposter syndromes that we're living up to, all that stuff. We've decided that curiosity means you don't know the answers, so you shouldn't be curious.
Yeah.
And compassion means that you're a pushover, so you shouldn't be compassionate. All this stuff.
Back to those words again, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we've just trained it out of ourselves. And what I'm loving about this definition that I'm coming to around being a grown up is it's in our backpack. We did it once. Most people did these things once.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because when you look at cultures as well, so like certain cultures, they celebrate that, what is it, rite of passage.
Yes, yeah.
And in our Western culture, we just don't have it.
No.
So like I remember where people go, young man. It's like, at what point do I just become a man? At what point is it 25? Is it 27?
I was
is
a
it
marketing
32?
girl for a long time.
That's it. Is it like, is it when I become a dad? There are those things there, but no one really defines it. And certainly certain cultures, they go, right, from the age of X, and there's a big ceremony and whatever else. And to some degree, there's an essence of them recognizing they need to be a bit more responsible. But what I love about what you said is that there are things in our childhood that actually are great qualities that we just go, well, we can't do that anymore.
Yeah.
We can't ask questions anymore. We just
can't ask for help. No.
Yeah.
We can't have the confidence you see in young children is just incredible. And yet again, we're taught about the risks of life, and that confidence is so missing in some people. And I don't mean like I can G myself up and be confident. I mean like that innate kind of, I'm going to walk into this room and see what happens level of confidence. I've got a 5-year-old, like that is confident, and he just has no qualms about entering a conversation. We need to work on his social etiquette a little bit, but broadly speaking, and they're some of the things that we've lost, and that trust in another person. So faith is a word that comes into this a lot for me, and that I just have faith in you.
Yeah.
And I think back to, it does this full circle with joy, in that, like, if I get cut up on the road, right, someone, cuts in front of me, my knee jerk historically might have been like to call them a name or get annoyed with them or whatever, right? It is so freeing to just have compassion for that individual instead, and just think to myself, they must be having such a tough day.
Yes.
Or I wonder where they're going, or I wonder what they're so preoccupied with. And then I can move on from it. So compassion is such a freeing quality.
Yeah, massively.
I can just move on from stuff. Whereas if I get angry with that individual, they've already gone. They've moved on with their day, and I'm dragging it around with me for the rest of the day. Like, it's pointless. It's so pointless.
Or hunting them down.
Yeah.
Trying to find them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But having this sense of faith in other people, that I generally believe that the majority of people on this planet don't want to upset anybody else, don't want to hurt other people. They want to have a nice time. It sounds really simplistic. Yeah,
but it's about that thing about thinking the best of other people,
yeah,
rather than going straight to the default that there's something wrong with them or they're out to get you.
Yeah,
which says more about you than them. In essence.
Absolutely.
And you know what? If they do behave to you in an ugly manner, it says more about them than it does you.
Yeah,
and being confident to say, well, maybe we're not the right fit.
Yeah.
You know, and they're on a journey, and maybe I'll meet them in 5 years' time and they're a different type of person.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's funny because the amount of times when you're in conversation, you go, when I was 15, I was a very different person.
Yeah.
You know, when I was 27, I was a very different person.
Oh my God,
because we were on the journey.
I'd hate to be judged now on the person I was 20 odd years ago.
That's it.
Yeah, because
we change.
Yeah, of course,
We change.
absolutely. And if we'd have done this yesterday, this conversation, I would be a different person to the person I am now, and the same tomorrow, because we're so impacted by everything that's going on around us. So bringing compassion to our relationships, however fleeting, a junction on the road or long lasting, I find is just so like it's selfishly, it releases me from needing to carry this tension and anger that I think so many people are trained to carry.
But if you actually study some of that stuff out, holding on to unforgiveness actually has health effects.
Yeah, absolutely.
And people don't realise that.
No.
If you hold something, there was a study. Sorry, I'm not going to be able to cite it or put citations on there. But there's a study. It's like there was a link between arthritis and unforgiveness.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And you're like, wow, and you look at that and you go, how many of those things, like we've got a heart problem because we're always angry.
Yeah.
When in fact, actually, as you said, if you just let it go, you would feel just physically better rather than like tense.
Yeah.
And that's incredible, in terms of that. If you can see people with a heart of compassion and go, well, maybe they haven't, and give them the benefit of the doubt, how much happier would we all be in organisations? Remove those things of insecurity. I mean, it's great.
I think the benefit of the doubt is like, if I could just sprinkle that around the country a little bit, around the world, just a tiny little bit more of giving people the benefit of the doubt, I genuinely think like people would just be happier.
Yeah. I agree.
Be just released from this tension. The arthritis thing is really interesting because, of course, when you're stressed, your cortisol levels change, your serotonin levels change, like all that stuff, and you create uric acid crystals, which is what goes to your joints.
There you go.
So stress is very linked in that way as well.
Yeah.
And I think across everything that I do in different ways, I'm trying to increase understanding. So whether that's of language or relationships or intent or whatever, but biology is a really great way of doing that too, because that I think helps some of the cynics get past this being an airy fairy softy thing.
Do you know what? You got to get this book written, Sam.
I'm so close. So close.
But I mean, what you're saying there is it's what's needed. I think it's definitely a conversation that you're having in your head and on paper, but it definitely needs to get out there. And I think just that thing of having compassion and give people the benefit of the doubt will make the world a much more purposeful place in itself.
I hope so.
So how will people get hold of you, Sammy? Just like connect with you generally?
LinkedIn. I'm a LinkedIn addict, unfortunately. But you can find me on there. So Sammy Burt. I have yourbackpack.co.uk. And there's a page on there called The Grown Up Book. So people can register for updates about the launch through there. And farleighperformance.com as well. So we're kind of in all these different places. But LinkedIn's probably first point of call. And I'm always up for a chat, as you can tell. I love talking all things people, purpose, performance, and words. So yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I've been absolutely loved it. I could go on for another hour, but it's been great. But you're going to have to come back. So
will do.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, John. All right, cheers.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to the Purpose People podcast. How you can help us is to like and subscribe our YouTube channel. You can also subscribe to our podcasts on Apple, Spotify, Google and Amazon. That helps us get our message out there to help people go after their dreams, double down on it and be successful in life on their terms.